Growing up in Puerto Rico, it's, I think, what gave me a basis for my roots, my identity. It's a very lush place. I grew up going to waterfalls, rivers, forest, and of course the ocean, coral reef with my father. It's an island of farmers, fishermen. Of course, it has a city part. But it's a place that has been mixing and blending forever. There's all these symbiotic relationships between different cultures, all these syncretisms, which are organic to the island, but they also surrounded me unconsciously. Only in retrospect, as I get older, I see the huge impact that it had, especially the lushness of the place. And I think the syncretic cultures as well. I say it's a place that's been mixing and blending or mixing and bending for centuries, because there's a scholar from Harvard, Robert Ferris Thompson, that he wrote about my work, and he said that the Caribbean was the school for learning for me. It's really what shaped the roots of what my work is about, and I strongly believe so. I think I always knew I wanted to be doing creative things. When you're young, or very young, you don't know what an artist is. But soon when I found out, especially with my grandmother, shared with me a Reader Digest of Frida Kahlo. And that I quickly understood what an artist was. So I kind of understood that I wanted to be an artist with the power and the force of Frida Kahlo for a very young kid. But I wasn't sure which discipline, if architecture, design, painting. I always knew I wanted to paint. So I think that kind of sets me up in the visual arts realm. And very early on in Puerto Rico, my parents were sensitive enough with the little income they had that it was important to foster that. So I took after-school classes in Puerto Rico with a master called Rechani and Margot, very early on, which I think is very important. Parents to be looking at, what is the kid sensitive to? Because otherwise you have to do all that homework when you're old and say, what was it that I liked to do when I was young? So that was an advantage. And I can think that I've been creating, being an artist since very early on. Of course, school starts forming you, and you start defining my degrees in design. I was terrified of having a degree as a fine artist. I studied architecture as well. I think 2-3 years of architecture before switching to design. I went to art school. But I like to express myself in almost all disciplines that are creative. From decorating a table, conceptualizing it, designing a chair, the visual realm. I think like most visual artists, what takes us there is that the best way we can express ourselves is with a visual image, not with what I'm doing right now. Words, that's for others. But what I really fully want to tell you is through my imagery. I think it's a very personal journey, and for me, it's internal. I felt when I found my voice, my language, on my own, I mean, of course, with friends and scholars, I feel I found myself once I'm free to express myself whichever way I want to. One thing is the creative process in the artist studio. The other thing is the business of art. That's up for other people to decide. I'm not much interested in that aspect. even though economically it helps in many ways. It allows me the freedom to create more projects, to travel, that I love traveling so much. But generally speaking, when I found my voice, and that took many years, embracing who you are, the things you inherited, your identity. I always like to talk about that. Because I think with my research studies, artists do find their voice once they embrace their immediate surroundings, their past, their heritage, their culture, and that's very personal elements transcend and in a way makes your work a little bit universal. But the very, very, very personal, the good and the bad, is part of the root of how you arrive to that place. Keith Haring once says, the primitive will always make us new. That has beautiful connotations for me. Of course, going to the primitive, you always find something inspiring. I like to say, once you find your roots, once you find your source, the possibilities are infinite. But you have to find the roots. You have to find who or what makes you unique, and it's not that difficult. What makes you unique is your circumstances, whichever they are, the culture that you were born into, or the one that you have decided to possess, the one that attracts you. In my case, it's Puerto Rico, Cuba, Miami. Those are the places I live. I don't live in New York. I'm not an artist informed by the culture of New York. I could adopt that and research it and own it. But the places I have owned is more Greece and more Mexico. We were talking about that earlier. So I think I arrived when, for me, that I feel in a comfortable place, when I found my voice. And my voice has to do with issues of memory, as you're familiar with. After many years, after art school, working in the studio, I realized what was the common element, the common driving force behind my work. And it's memories, things that stay with me, that persist in my mind, and they want to be expressed, they want to be touched, they want to be turned three-dimensionally. I explore issues of memory. I take the past and I present it in a new context, mostly. I love objects, and I love the memory embedded in objects. So I use objects and I activate them to release the memory that is embedded in them. I'm an optimist. I come from a generation of optimism. They call it the architecture of optimism. My generation, the future always looked brighter. So that also permeates in my work. I'm a poet in a way, romantic, nostalgic, and those are things that help shape my voice to this day. The Pelican Passage was commissioned work by Faena Arts Foundation. It was very, very exciting. I was allowed a lot of freedom to do it. I think what happened with that project was, as I was talking before, owning your history, owning your identity, and getting inspired from it, presenting the past in a new context. The Pelican Passage allowed me to do that. Let me explain myself. I always wanted to do a giant piñata. I grew up with piñatas, actually the same piñata year after year that my mother, it would break, and there wasn't much of a budget, and my mother would change the decoration and put strings again. And I can see it in the photo albums. I actually asked my mom, it's like, Mom, it's so great, you always got me a new piñata when I was a little kid. She said, no, it was the same one, we just fixed it. So, moments of joy that stay there, it's emotional. So, I also grew up with floats, embracing your own culture, embracing the surroundings in Puerto Rico. The Pelican Passage was also a float. The Pelican Passage was a procession. I grew up with that as well. And even though these are items that some people in the status quo of the art world will dismiss, they're real to me. So it doesn't matter. It's the need for me to express myself overrides any of the rules of the art world. And the curator was great because I think it's one of the first artists that was looking at this type of traditions like processions as an art form, and then she contemporized the idea. So I had my piñata, I had my float, I had my procession, I had a cake as well because the piñata did look like a cake. That's something else that my mother would do every year. One of those homemade cakes that she will decorate slightly different every year. And I think with that piece, that commission, many things came together for me that sometimes they're very difficult to get opportunities in the art world like that. To do a procession, piñata, cake, float. This is not very common. And it was joyful. We produced a choreography with it. Some of my main art patrons actually that are such a big part of my life and Alberto's were actually part of the procession. We did costumes for them as well. In general, the more I look at my work and that piece, I also see that my work is informed by my own experiences, not necessarily the other way around. It's not art informing art, but actually my own personal journey informing my work. Currently, I'm working with video projections inspired or informed by my previous work. It's kind of like my rule. When I do video art, the derivative has to be an existing work of art. It's very hard for me to think of something that exists just in the digital world. So my rule is that it must be derivative of something that I have already done. So the Future Eternal, it's a video that is projected into the iconic Betsy Orb in Miami Beach. Miami Beach is very special to me because it's where my first studio was in Perfect Utopia for many, many years. And I worked there, developed myself, and found my voice over there and in Perfect Utopia during the South Beach 80s and 90s years. We call it the South Beach Underground. Actually, our foundation is doing a book about that period. So the Future Eternal is a video, it's a digital video projection reflected into the Betsy Orb, which is in an alley behind the Betsy Hotel and the Carlton Hotel. It's informed by this concept that I was trying to define about how constant we live in the future, not so much even in the present, and a little bit on the past. The full name of the piece is actually Process Ritual, the Future Eternal. And it deals with this conflicting observation, if I may say, that in North America people are eternally living in the future. You have another exhibit, and during the opening, when you're having your little tequila show, they're asking you, and when is your next exhibit? Which is kind and generous, but it's a habit. You win an Academy Award, and when is your next movie? No? So it's kind of like an observation on that. I do it with stars. It's alluding to the future. They're very symbolic of that. But the stars in this digital video actually come from my collection of tree toppers. I think you're familiar with that series, the actual physical series called The Future Eternal. I collected hundreds of tree toppers because in Puerto Rico during Christmas we used to go on parrandas, which are the Latin version of Christmas carols of sorts, but with tumbadoras, maracas, and it's a beautiful tradition. And you will wake up people during the holidays. They have food, alcohol ready for you at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And as a child, my main thing was to run and see the Christmas tree and see what was on top, which was these magical objects loaded with light and hope and future. And as I grew up older, I started collecting those, and I have hundreds and hundreds of them, different forms and shapes. Eventually an artwork came out, which is the Future Eternal, and the one projected at the orb is the digitized version of the actual work. Well, here we go, connecting the past, a childhood memory that is very dear to me, and presenting it in a new context. These are no longer tree toppers now. They're decorating an orb in an alley, and some of the works from the series are actually became sculptural assemblages. So they kind of like lose their original purpose. And when I say like taking an object that is embedded with memory and activating the memory in it, that's what I see in this work. It's very clear to me, still following that path. Transforming an object from the past and presenting it in a new context. See how hard it is to put words in artists? Isn't it better if I show you the work and this is what I want to say? I don't have to go through this.
That was great.
So Miami was very difficult for me when I first moved here in the 80s, because I missed, of course, Puerto Rico, Old San Juan, a very old colonial city. I missed the Taino culture, or the native Puerto Rican people. I was very immersed in that, grew up on that, the food. And I found Miami extremely boring back then. I dedicated myself basically to go to school. And at one moment, there was this great artist named Christo and Jean-Claude, and they presented the surrounded islands, those beautiful pink islands on Biscayne Bay, fuchsia color that I'll never forget. I volunteered there, kind of like illegally, because I was kind of like a bad boy in high school. And when I was there at Pelican Island and saw these artists and this fuchsia fabric, I'll never forget. And the first time, and I was young, I was like 15. The first time I saw Miami as a muse, I saw an artist using Miami as a muse. I actually became groupies with some other people. We will show up in Ocean Drive at the Leslie Hotel, which is where Christo and Jean-Claude were staying. And that's the first time I saw Ocean Drive. I was young. It is then when I decided that when I finished art school, I was coming to Miami Beach, to this city, beach city, beautiful in beautiful ruins, but so hopeful with this Jacksonian architecture. Maurice Lapidus, that designed the Fontainebleau Hilton, eventually became a friend and stopped by my studio. So I built a story there. I started building a story that started influencing my earlier work with all the syncretic cultures of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, and then this futuristic city. So it was Christo that made me see Miami as a muse. And I had a great friend too. She always talked about Miami in the 80s and 90s with that force. And she used to say, I don't know if it was her, but it was something like, the best thing about Miami is that it's so close to the United States, no? And that has very deep connotations, no? So Miami has been a muse for me and for many artists. I stayed, I insisted. It reflects on my work, the good and the bad, how it should be. And I really didn't try to become something that I wasn't, I was an artist born and raised in Puerto Rico, Cuban parents, with a lot of Afro-Cuban influences, Afro-Caribbean influences, in love with Greece, Mexico, and surrounded and empapado de Miami. So the Betancourt La Torre Foundation, it's a non-for-profit that Alberto La Torre, architect, and he actually collaborates with a lot of my artwork as well, and he's the studio director. We created as a way to help support up-and-coming artists from the Caribbean Basin and Miami. One of the projects we worked with was helping artists during Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and recently during COVID, we delivered around 20-30 grants, catch grants, to help artists that were economically handicapped during the pandemic. We're working on a future project, cultural project, to document a specific period in Miami. It's called South Beach, the Last Underground. And we look forward to being able to raise more funds so we can get involved supporting up-and-coming artists. It's important to me in the sense that when I was an up-and-coming artist, the idea of someone purchasing my work or just even a cash reward made a huge difference, no? So the mission of the foundation is that it's actually trying to help in the most simplistic way artists, which, as I know myself, they mostly just want to be in their studio or outdoors or wherever it is doing their artwork, no? And you need freedom, and in a way you need some economic freedom also to do that, to develop your own voice. It helped me when I was young. It helped me when people will come, purchase my work. It's a way of, or a cliche, it's a way of giving back in the way that I learned that it helped me. It's very dear to Albert and I, the foundation. I'm looking forward to the release of the book Making Miami, which is part of an exhibit that will be happening during Art Basel Week in the Design District. The book is important for me because it helps or attempts to define the Miami art scene. There's unfortunately very little academic research or records of this. So I'm looking forward very much to that. I have an essay in there in which I explore, or I go through the journey of living in Miami from the 80s to the present. I have an exhibit coming up in Mexico, in Careyes, Fundación Careyes. It's a solo show. I've been working for the last 3-4 months in that project. I work also part of the residence program with artists there, with kids from las comunidades, los pueblos alrededor de Careyes. That was quite beautiful, and I can't wait to see all these kids again. They actually helped me put the show together. There's two places that I enjoy, many places I enjoy in Miami, but I'll give you these two. Of course, Stiltsville. You need a boat or a kayak to get there. Miami is one of these places that I consider almost an island because it's surrounded by water almost everywhere. And north of here, well, you know, I-95 is like a barrier. The rest is like the Gulf and Florida, South Florida, no? It's the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. So it's really Miami from the ocean. It's like Oz, the land of Oz. And Stiltsville has great history, and it's quiet and it's so still. Stiltsville is so still. And right behind the studio here, there's the St. Mary's Cathedral, which has I'm sharing this in here, one of my favorite quiet places in all of Miami. The chapel, it's quite spectacular, quite moving. It has wall-to-wall stained glass of the deepest shades of blues and cobalt blues, and some highlights in red, and it's like a blue forest. I go in there a lot. I take some of my friends. It's one of the secrets of many that are in Miami. It's quite spectacular. It's one of my favorite places in the world, being in there. And Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome very much.